Welcome to the Evidence-Based Practices and Targeted Support and Improvement Schools webinar. I'm Natalie Guashiri, the Educational Program Consultant for Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools, but I also work to support schools and districts with their evidence-based practices needs. I work in District 180 at the Kentucky Department of Education in the Office of Continuous Support and Improvement. Today, we're going to have an overview of what evidence-based practices are, why we use them, review the 4 levels of evidence from the Every Student Succeeds Act, determine what data you should look at to determine your students' needs, consider questions to get to a deeper level of understanding, learn how to find EBPs, and look at resources the department and other outside organizations offer. By the end of this training, you will be able to describe the characteristics of an EBP, recognize evidence-based language, and find EBPs based on your students' needs. What are evidence-based practices? Evidence-based practices evolved out of the medical field. Evidence-based practices became the norm in the medical field as physicians moved away from intuition-based treatment of patients and focused on interventions that were studied and proven to be beneficial. ESSA has defined evidence-based practices for educational purposes. EBPs include activities, strategies, and interventions that are derived from objective evidence and are proven to improve student outcomes. We use EBPs because they tend to lead to an increased likelihood of positive student outcomes. They lead to increased accountability because of the data required to support the choice of the practice or program, and it's an ESSA requirement for school improvement. There are 4 levels of evidence according to ESSA, who defines evidence-based for educational purposes. Each level reflects the rigor of study used to determine the effectiveness of the intervention. The higher the level, the more rigorous the study. For example, Level 4 demonstrates a rationale and is the least rigorous, while Level 1, strong evidence, is the most rigorous. TSI schools can use any ESSA evidence level in their turnaround plan. However, if the EBP is being funded by federal grants, please ensure the practice meets the funding source's requirements. There are 5 steps for implementing an EBP. When taken together, these steps promote continuous improvement and can support better outcomes for students. First, you must identify your local needs. We know that educators across the Commonwealth and the nation talk with each other. You may share ideas, strategies, and programs, but you really need to know what your students' needs are. Then you must select relevant EBPs. If you have English learners who need a reading intervention, selecting a math program isn't likely to help. Next, you must plan for implementation. How will you train staff? What will implementing the program with fidelity look like? How often are you going to measure the results? Then it's the fun part, the implementation. It's time to start the program or strategies. Lastly, you must examine, reflect, and measure the results. How will you know if the program is working or not if you don't assess it? And once you get those results, what will you do with them? Before you dive into finding evidence-based practices for your school, there are some questions your school should ask. Why have we been named for targeted support and improvement? Every school that has TSI designation is identified by one or more subgroups. So what are the needs of students in your identified subgroup? Do they have cognitive disabilities? Do they need improvement in speech and language skills? Do they experience barriers because they are economically disadvantaged? And is there a specific content that is a priority need? Is there a reading, math, or literacy need to be met? Here are a few more questions that your school should be asking. Are we looking for practices that all teachers will use? Do we need an EBP that core teachers will use as a scaffold? Will special education teachers use the activity during resource time? And lastly, do we need overall systems improvement? When searching for EBPs, there are characteristics that will distinguish them. Evidence-based practices should be supported by preponderance of scholarly literature, such as peer-reviewed articles. An EBP has been researched using a study design that measures its impact. Study results are supported by statistical analysis. Statistical analysis means that there are numbers involved. I usually look for tables and numbers when I'm evaluating the rigor of a study. The research compares the achievement of a control group versus a practice group. The study cannot be overridden by more recent or more rigorous research. So you can't use an article from 2007 that supports a specific strategy or program if there's an article that was published in 2020 that states the ineffectiveness of it. Now that we've gone through the basics of what evidence-based practices are, why we use them, and how that affects school improvement, let's go through the steps of finding evidence-based practices based on specific subgroups and their needs. First, we're going to look at the TSI classification. For this example, we're going to use English learners. Then we need to look at data to decide what their needs are. Again, for this example, we found that our English learners are weak in vocabulary development. So then we're going to search scholarly articles for intervention to support our students' needs, which is mind mapping for reading. So here we have the article to address English learners. This article investigates the effectiveness of using polycategory mind map for vocabulary development. Here we have the abstract from this paper. I usually read the abstract to understand what the purpose and outcome of the study is. In this abstract, it states that 30 students from the third year suburban school in Mercer and Johor participated in the study. Vocabulary pre-tests and post-tests are used as the instruments of collecting the data. The results of the post-test at the end of the second cycle showed a significant difference before and after using the polycategory mind map to develop vocabulary. The findings concluded that using the features of polycategory mind map, which are the pictures, keywords, and grouping of words, aided the students in learning vocabulary. Let's go through another example. First, we're going to look at the TSI classification. This time, the focus is economically disadvantaged students. Next, we're going to look at data on economically disadvantaged students to decide what their needs are. For this example, we've found that the economically disadvantaged students lack post-secondary readiness. So then we're going to search for scholarly articles for an intervention to support our students' needs, which is post-secondary readiness. After we've searched ERIC, Google Scholar, or other open source peer-reviewed journals, we've found a strategy to address the problem: mentoring programs aimed at economically disadvantaged students. The article that suggests mentoring programs for economically disadvantaged students is Follow the Money or Follow the Mentors: The Impacts of Mentoring on Absenteeism and Achievement in High Poverty Schools. Again, I look at the abstract to understand the purpose and outcome of the study. This abstract states that this causal comparative examination investigates the effects of a mentoring program on disadvantaged students in an urban secondary school. The findings reveal that students participate in mentoring for extended periods, demonstrate significantly fewer absences, resulting in higher grade point averages. First, we'll view the Educational Resource Information Center. ERIC is a place where you can use particular search terms based on your needs. In this case, we'll use peer-assisted learning strategies, students with disabilities effectiveness. I always click on the boxes, peer-reviewed only, and full text available on ERIC. I click on these boxes because all EBPs must be peer-reviewed, and you don't want to come across an article that may be useful, but you can't look at it because it's stuck behind a paywall. Once you've entered your search terms, click on the search button. If you look on the left side of the screen, you can narrow down our over 1,000 results a bit if you want. I typically don't because I like to see the gamut of strategies and programs that are out there. But in this case, I'm going to focus on elementary education. So I'm going to click on the elementary education link. As I peruse the results, I see the article titled Effectiveness of Integrating Drawing and Teaching English Language in an Intellectual Disability Classroom. Then I'm going to look at the abstract to see if it meets our qualifications. It looks like the study is a quasi-experimental. There was a pre-test and a post-test, and they've concluded that integrating drawing and teaching English language is an effective instructional strategy. Last, we'll visit the Google Scholar page. Google Scholar is tricky because you're not guaranteed to find open source articles. But if you find an article that you think you might like and you have access to an institution of higher learning's library, or if your local library provides access, you can request the article through interlibrary loan. So I'm going to put in the search box, Math Strategies for African American Students Effectiveness. On the side, there are options that will allow you to narrow down the results by years published and relevance. As you're perusing the results, I would suggest that you do not use master's theses. Remember, studies must be peer reviewed to be used as support for your interventions. I see a promising article, Effectiveness of Inquiry-Based and Teacher-Directed Instruction in an Alabama Elementary School. When I click on the link, it takes us to Eric, and the abstract mentions fifth grade science and mathematics, inquiry-based classroom instruction, and the positive impact on subgroups. Once you've found EBPs that will work with your specific population and the research that suggests it will increase student achievement, it's time to reflect the practices in your comprehensive school improvement plan. In the goal building template, there's a section that provides guidance on filling out the evidence-based practices chart. This section provides resources and information to guide each TSI, ATSI, and CSI school to complete the process. The Evidence-Based Practices website link will take you to KDE's EBP website. The Compliance Requirements link will take you to a document that outlines the requirements of the narrative that you're going to complete for each EBP you choose to implement. If you're not comfortable with writing the narrative as outlined in the compliance requirements, there's also a link to Empowered by Evidence, reviewing evidence under ESSA. It's a downloadable Word document. This Word document scaffolds the process for you. It prompts you to fill in the necessary information. So essentially, these two documents do the same thing, but the process is different. Here's that chart. The heading asks you to list the evidence-based activity, the evidence citation, and check whether it's uploaded in eProof. The first row is an example that KDE has provided, and I've filled in the next two rows with the articles that we saw earlier, focusing on mentoring programs for economically disadvantaged students and mind mapping for English learners. Now we're going to look at the resources we provide at KDE. Many of you have perused our evidence-based practices website, but let's look at what's here. We have information about ESSA and why EBPs are used in school improvement. Then we have some supporting materials that include information on how to find evidence, tools for evaluating evidence, webinars and training. For each of these, we have posted a video, the presentation, and a transcript. We've also listed some external resources that link to other websites that may help you find proper EBPs for your population, such as What Works Clearance House, Kentucky Virtual Library Education Databases, and ERIC. Lastly, I publish a weekly OCIS research bulletin that features 2 peer-reviewed articles on an evidence-based strategy. Past topics have included Achieve 3000, outdoor education, YMCA programs, 4-H robotics, co-teaching, and peer-assisted learning strategies. If you're interested in receiving this bulletin, please email me at natalie.guashiri@education.ky.gov. Thank you for your time and attention.